cortex. And I will not bore you with all the science. If you're science, I apologize. I love this kind of stuff. But we know that there's about a 30% gap, right? Neurotypical kids, ADHD kids, about 30% behind. The reason why that's important, okay, so here at 5, right? You start kindergarten. The 30% gap in their brain size is almost insignificant at 5. But look at the difference at 10. That's a huge, huge difference, right? And what the prefrontal cortex does is it regulates a lot of the things that we're going to talk about later. It is like the CEO of your brain, right? It helps tell you how to get things done, how to behave, how to regulate emotion, right? All of these things. So there's a huge, huge gap. And then when you get over to here at 15, it's not as significant anymore, right? But for a while, there's this massive, massive gap. And it's not their fault, right? Their brain is literally developing slower. They are doing the best that they can with these challenges. So, brain. I will give you all of these. The things that are important, and this is kind of a controversial thing to talk about generally, is treatment intervention. The research base only fully supports 2 things, and they work best when they are used together. 1 is medication. 2 is psychosocial treatments. That can be one-on-one with the child, can be with the parent. Parent education is an incredibly effective tool based on the research, or school interventions. And that can be support, training, accommodations, modifications, anything. But they work best in combination. So 70 to 90% of kids, right, who try medication get a positive benefit from it. Not everybody, and there are different types of medication, and it depends on the biochemistry of each individual person. Some works better than others. Unfortunately, we've only had access to methylphenidate here, which is Ritalin, or sort of just the long-acting one. Some of the other ones we can't get here. So for some kids, they may try medication and it doesn't work. And if they were in a different country, they could try another kind of medication or another kind. But here, the options are fairly limited. But the pills don't teach skills. Has anybody heard that before? That's Russell Barkley who says that all the time. Pills don't teach skills. They create a level playing field that allows the child to learn, right? It regulates the brain through dopamine and norepinephrine to allow everything to kind of settle. It's almost like having just turned off that air conditioning, right? But now all of a sudden, there's this kind of calm in the room. We didn't notice it wasn't calm before he turned the air conditioning off, right? But now that he turned it off, you're like, oh, it's quiet. As somebody who takes ADHD medication, I can tell you that's kind of what it's like in my brain when my medication kicks in, right? I don't really notice it, but when it kicks in, it's like, oh, okay, now I can think, now I can concentrate, now I can focus. And so that's what the medication does. But it has to be with these psychosocial interventions to then help with the other part, right? Okay, now I have this calm. Now, what do I do? How do I do it? How do I train myself and teach myself to do these things? Okay, so executive functions. Executive functions are important, and they are directly connected to the prefrontal cortex, right? 30% behind. So if you are 10 years old, how old is that part of your brain? 7. What grade is a 7-year-old in?
1.
Grade 1. Okay. What grade is a 10-year-old in? Math says they should be like 3 years different. But like think about what you expect of a 7-year-old and what you expect of a 10-year-old, right? Really different. Anybody have kids that are like roughly 3 years apart? Yeah, right? They act really different. They're capable of different things. they respond differently, right? So an ADHD kid is operating with a brain that in many of the areas that are important to school are at a 30% deficit. Not exact, it's not 30% for everybody, depending on what I'm saying, but globally, broadly, a 30% deficit. And think about how hard that is to be that kid, right? To not be able to do the things that all of your friends can do. And they wonder. And when you talk to psychologists and psychiatrists, little kids, little 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, they see that difference. They know that their friends, their peers, can do things that they can't do, that they should be able to do, right? That they think they should be able to do, that we expect them to be able to do. But their brain just isn't there yet, and it's not their fault. So executive functions are all of these things, right? Executive functions are the things that allow me to remember to put my slides on a flash drive, and remember to put the flash drive in my bag, and remember to bring the bag with me, right? And remember to write the times over here so that I hold myself accountable, right? Because I have time, whatever. So all of these different things, these are executive functions. And if you're operating at a 30% delay, you're struggling. We see them struggling, right? When we look at these kids and think, why can't they do this? Why can't they remember? Why can't they, control their emotions? Why can't they manage their time? I told them they have 20 minutes, we have a clock. I tell them, I give them a reminder, right? Why are they struggling? Because their brain development. This is in the folder that I will share with you. It gives you that kind of, somebody else to do the math for you. But you can see, here, at age 7, their executive age is not even 5 yet, right? At 10, it's almost 7, right? As you go up. We know that the brain doesn't stop developing until late 20s, early 30s. At some point, it stops. So for kids with ADHD, they may never really catch up if they were more on the extreme end, but other kids catch up fairly quickly. So there's a study in Canada that shows that the youngest students in the class are more likely to be diagnosed. Why do you think that might be?
Because you're already expecting them to be below grade level in terms of executive function.
Yeah, so the youngest kids in the class, not only are they biologically the youngest, which means, and there's a big gap between a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, right? Like there's not a big gap between a 51-year-old and a 52-year-old. But a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, it's a pretty big gap developmentally. So if you're the youngest in your class, you already biologically have that gap. And then if you have ADHD, you take that 30% tax, deficit, and you're really behind. So you're much more likely to be diagnosed. The reason why that is important is not to excuse the behavior, right? Not to say like, oh, well, they have ADHD, it is what it is. It's to help you understand why it is what it is, why the behavior looks like it does. When you are thinking about these kids, right, you want to be about, how many of you, I don't know what your report cards look like here, but usually in the primary grades, we get marks or grades for things that really are executive functioning, right? For doing neat work, for turning things in on time, for staying on task, or staying in our seat, right? Do you grade any of those kinds of things? Tell me some of the things that you grade them for.
Well, some of them is like, are they able to keep their things tidy? And it's the part that is specifically for the child itself. Like we have the grades for the things, but some is like their attention to detail. Are they able to focus? Like not focus, but like are they able to perform tasks? Are they needing reminders or things like that?
Yeah. So this stuff isn't saying don't do this, right? This stuff is saying when you evaluate that kid, a kid with an ADHD diagnosis, right, or one that you know is struggling with executive functions, are you fairly evaluating them, right? Are you comparing them to a neurotypical kid of the same age, or are you comparing them to where their brain development really is, right? Like even, we just said, like the gap between a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old is huge. So is it fair to assess the youngest kid in the class to the same executive functioning standards as the oldest kid in the class, right? Who maybe is 6.5. Maybe you got one who just snuck in, and you've got one who, took an extra year because they moved countries or something. So it's just saying, think about each individual child, and rather than assessing them on this, neurotypical, everybody should be here, for kids that you know have significant challenges, are you really assessing them on their true kind of brain development age? Yeah.
It's actually, though, it's based on frequency in primary, so it's how frequently you see those things. So I look at it as an indication as if a child has a low frequency or high frequency in a large area, then maybe that's something we talk about with the parents.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to judge them differently, because it's asking how often are they on task, frequently or always is one of the choices, frequently, and then there's less frequent. So I think it's good to tell the truth, because then I can say to the parent, well, they're frequently off task, or whatever, I can't remember off by heart what it is. But I think that if our kids aren't diagnosed with something, we want to look at, here's a...
Yeah, and I think it's really important to use that information to talk to the parents, right? But does the kid need to see that on their report card?
Well, I
Right,
think
like they already know they're struggling.
it's not a grade, though. It doesn't affect their grade in the subject. It's an overall, basically an illustrative example of their achievement in class as a whole. And it's called social development on the report card.
Yeah. So if a kid is struggling in social development, do you
I
think they
need to tell
know?
the truth so we can talk to the parents about it.
But we can talk to the parents without putting it on the report card. That, I think, is what you're getting at.
Yeah,
So that
I mean,
the
sometimes I
grade
think
one,
about, like, the message
grade
that we
one
send to
student
them.
doesn't see, I know I'm behind, as you said, they can tell, and then, I feel further behind because of what's put on my report card. If we notice it as teachers, we can have those conversations and document it, just maybe not on something a kid sees. Is that what you're kind of?
Yeah, because it ties into that self-efficacy, right? The understanding of how well we are able to do something. And the school environment is a really unique thing, right? Some kids are just good at doing school, and some kids are not, right? Some kids are just meant to thrive in this type of highly structured environment, following other people's instructions,